Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Death with Dignity podcast. It's strange recording this without Andrew. He was such a unique and cool soul that touched so many lives. He wanted the podcast to continue after he had passed, and continue it will. There's no better way to do that than with today's guests, Andrew's parents, Suzy and Steve Flack. Andrew's family and friends visited Oceanside in July, and we had a grand old time celebrating the man that brought us together. Before we dive into the episode, I wanted to share an email we received from a listener. It reads, I really feel like I got to know Andrew over the many hours of recordings. It seems like a project that brought him a lot of meaning, and it certainly had a big impact on me. What a gift to have given the world in his final months. He is still changing lives even though he is gone. I was really impressed with how he could coexist with his objectively awful situation. He was down to earth, honest, tender, and open about his reality. He seemed to give himself and others space to grieve while also genuinely finding and appreciating the silver linings, focusing on what was still possible and what mattered to him most in the time he had. I think he set a high bar that we should all strive for in end of life. That's all. Thank you for making this podcast. Andrew clearly had a special crew and he lives on in all of you. It's incredible that someone could listen to the podcast and capture Andrew's essence so well. Recording a podcast became harder towards the end of Andrew's life, but 15 minutes before he passed, at a time where we all saw he was hurting, he summoned the energy to read the Desiderata. That act symbolized how he was throughout his cancer journey. He had a toughness of spirit that is difficult to put into words. Okay, let's get to the episode. Steve and Suzy open a window into what it was like the day Andrew ingested the medical aid in dying medication, what the last 9 months have been like, and speak openly and honestly about what it is like to be in their position today. Finally, I'd like to give a shout out to Andrew's best friend, Strev, who has joined the podcast team. Let's get into it. All right, we're officially back on the Death with Dignity podcast. It is July 16th, 2023, and as Steve or Suzy just told me, they're both here with me right now. It is the 8th-month anniversary of Andrew's passing. We didn't plan this. It just happened. And we thought we'd get together and just talk about it a little bit. How are you guys doing? We're missing our favorite person right now. And it's obviously weird being here. But we all thought that people could really benefit from hearing about the day of and kind of what people have been going through. Some events that happened afterwards. And, of course, somebody's at the door right now. Okay, I think we are back. We had some guests at the door. And just so everybody out there knows, Suzy and Steve are actually in town. And so are some friends. And we have been celebrating Andrew's life this weekend. And we want to talk about what happened. Or just like the process of the medical aid in dying process. So I guess we could start with the day of. Suzy, I'll pass it to you. I'm sure a lot of our listeners want to know how it went down. And it was a beautiful process, and maybe you'd like to speak more about it.
Yes, I would. And I agree. It was a beautiful process. And part of Drew's role with the podcast was to demystify death. And that's one of the reasons we felt it was important that his listeners heard about his final moments. So it was just a typical day. And Drew had anticipated that he would take his medicine sometime around sunset. And we went through the day, and Drew had arranged for his hospice nurses to come. And it was probably just about sunset time when he said to us, I think I'm ready. He had spent some time alone on that day. And Haas, refresh my memory. Did he actually read his poem on that day?
He did. He read his poem. The story of the poem I thought was really good because Steve might remember we were going to actually move the podcast stuff down so he could see the sunset from his window. And he got this last urge to just do one more episode. So about maybe 15 minutes before he took the medication, he recorded the Desiderata, the poem. And it was a really cool moment. It was a very raw moment. I think me, Steve, Z, and like Andrew were in the room. And we brought the mic to his bed because obviously he couldn't move as much anymore. And he one last act of just it was just a really cool act, I guess, where he gave it his all and he read the poem.
Yeah, that was a very touching part of the whole day because he hadn't really made any plans other than he wanted the family to be with him. And as Hasban was getting the room set up and it was starting to become dusk, he decided he wanted to read that poem. And it was pretty tough to hear him read through that. And he was just great, how those words meant so much to him. And I think they meant a lot to other people that have heard it since he recorded that.
Yeah, the story of that poem is just amazing. Forget which president, but in like the 50s or 40s, he heard it. He basically made everybody in his staff hear it, and it's just been passed on for a really long time now. It's a poem by Max Ehrman, I believe. And yeah, that was just one of the epic things that he did among many things that he did. I think about that day a lot and how perfect it was, like you couldn't plan it. And I guess he did, and he planned a lot of it. And it wasn't the original day he was going to take it. 2 days before he planned on taking it, we had the nurses come. We all like hung out. We decided to do one final meal, which was the McDonald's, but that kind of backfired a little bit, and his stomach got upset. So he decided that it might not be the day to do it. But the day he did end up doing it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting because we wanted to talk about that day, and I know, Suzy, you want to share some moments about that, some memories, but he had really arranged it so that the whole family could be out here for 6 to 8 weeks ahead of time. We were all able to come out and be together as a family for those last 6 or 8 weeks, and spent a lot of time together and talk, and just kind of like it was 20 years ago when everybody was still living under one roof. And he made sure that we had that time, and he got to talk to all of us individually and together. And that was typical of his approach to his whole disease over those 5 or 6 years. He was always the one that was in control. He, brought us all along with his thinking. He did so much planning with his doctor, Dr. Miller, who we all owe a debt of gratitude to, who helped Drew with the whole medical aid and dying process. And we were fortunate that Drew had somebody like him that was such an advocate over these last few years.
One thing, before we even get to more details about the day of, even I've wondered is, yeah, those last 6 weeks were just pretty amazing here. I don't think I've lived a period of time that was like that. There was just so much love in this house and among everybody. You guys had guests coming in from all over the U.S. and just everybody that wanted to see him, everybody that was important to him, made it out here, and we all just hung out. We had barbecues. You made so much food, and we just had a really good time. And yeah, I don't know if you guys want to talk about that, but I know for you guys to have your daughters, your son, this in the same home, you guys, you have grandkids now. Like what was that like, being in that moment, knowing the moment that you were in?
It's interesting because we all knew what the outcome would be. We were here to support Drew in his death, but those weeks leading up to it were so amazing, and the comfort of remembering those times really helps me get through the dark periods. We did, like you say, just have so much fun. And friends from junior high flew in to spend a few days with Drew. I felt like the place was a revolving door, and it just kept getting better with each new visitor. So that is something I'll always treasure.
Yeah, and we would hang out here in the day. We'd party at night. There was different groups. Everyone had their own schedule, but we would just all come together for Drew, and or because of Drew, I guess. And yeah, I thought about those times a lot too. Just having you guys at the house. When you guys left, it was definitely really, really hard. Um, but what's it like being back at the house right now? You guys are pretty courageous, I think, to like even be out here, and you're following in the footsteps of your son in being here, doing this podcast, and even being in this house right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I got really anxious about coming out a few days before my flight, and as a former special ed teacher, I texted Haas and asked him to take a picture of the living room, which I'm sure he thought was really odd. But it was a visual that I looked at and I thought, I can do this. It's nothing to be fearful of. And as soon as I got here, I realized, yeah, this is where we're meant to be right now. And it is a good way to honor Drew being here, going to all his favorite spots, hanging out with his friends. So I'm very happy we made this decision.
Yeah, it was. We always love coming to Oceanside and seeing you guys, and Drew lived here for a long time, and I think the hardest part was when we walked in. Wasn't so much just seeing the house, but I know walking back down the hallway to his bedroom, and that was tough just because the last memories that I think a lot of us kind of retained were that sunset and all of us gathered around the bed before he took the prescription, and it was such a beautiful evening and the sun was going down. But that, I still see that. I walked in during the day and I could still see that sunset, and it's just felt like we were all here with him again. And he was getting ready to move on.
Yeah, I thought he was really bold with how he did how you went through the process, because it's I've been listening to old episodes, and I could see that he asked people the questions about what their loved ones did during that day, and I'm sure he thought a lot about it himself, and the way he approached it was very graceful, I guess.
The other thing that when you were talking about all of the people that came to visit him for those few months, it was amazing how he would take time with each of those people, like before they would head back to the airport, and he'd have a private moment with them, because it was all very difficult for them, right? Every time somebody said goodbye, everyone kind of knew it was going to be the last time they would see Drew, but he took it upon himself to make those moments pretty special, and he always had private moments with former classmates and hockey players and work colleagues and friends. He had a moment with them, and I think that was pretty meaningful.
Yeah, he made sure everybody was okay, and even with me, with everybody being around, it wasn't just me and Drew at the house anymore, and we didn't get those moments. And I remember, like, I was like, oh, those moments, those opportunities are gone now. Everybody's here. But even then, in the morning, as soon as he saw me wake up, he would like invite me like over to the couch where he was, and we'd smoke a J and just talk and still get our conversations in about life, the podcast, about every little thing that we talked about. And yeah, it's amazing how in his whatever like lucid moments he had, he was thinking of other people. Um, I want to talk a little bit about that day of and how he planned it and a couple of things that he did. I thought about that a lot. Like, um, for example, we all got together and we watched The Office. That was really cool. I remember we watched a couple of episodes. We just hung out like we did like every day. We knew what was going to happen a couple hours from now, but he kept it pretty normal. I remember he just had some thoughts for us about how we should all stay connected and just send each other a text now and then, and just I think he wanted all of us to, yeah, just stay connected.
Yeah, he did. That was really important to him. And we made a promise to him that we'd get together at least once a year. So I have to keep that going forever.
Yeah, agree. Um, I want to ask you guys, like, I obviously didn't see you guys after you left as much. We had a memorial at his high school, which I don't want to get the name wrong of, but I thought that was a really special time and maybe the most like amazing memorial I've ever been to. I don't know if you guys want to speak about that.
Yeah, that it was so wonderful. Andrew was, as you know, a special ed teacher at Mission Hills High School, and he had such a wonderful community there of teachers, students, and parents that supported him. The school was gracious enough to allow us to use the library facility, and we had a gathering to honor him back in December. And it was just a beautiful experience. So many people attended, his hockey friends, his Nevada House friends. Most of all, what sticks with me is that many of his students were there. And it was so incredible because a few of them spoke. Some of the students are nonverbal, so they used a device to get their point across. And they were all beautiful sentiments of how important Andrew was to them as their teacher. Something I'll never forget. It was just a beautiful afternoon. And then we also had a celebration of life back in Chicago in January, which equally was as amazing with many people. Really had a tone of more of just a party than we were there to celebrate someone who had just passed. Everyone was just happy. We had a lot of pictures set out, and it was a beautiful day.
I think it was great because the California um, friends and family and work colleagues could come here in California. Then some of you guys like Haas and Z came back to Chicago. But the celebration here in California, you're right. The kids that spoke and then some of their parents and the stories, everyone got a chance to say a little something about what they remembered about Drew or how he had touched their lives. And then the special ed community planted a tree for Drew out on the grounds. And I know we're planning to go see that. Apparently it's just started to bloom at this time of year. So we're going to try and make a point to get over there and see the tree.
Yeah, that memorial at his high school was fantastic. I mean, we talked about the special ed community a lot, but I never got to actually see him work, and teach. And just what those parents had to say was incredible. They were, just as sad as family or anybody. It's like, they lost one of their loved ones. And yeah, like I said, I was floored by that. And even like the security guards at the school spoke. It's like everybody who, there was just so many people that wanted to say something, and there was such a diversity of people. It's not just it was the people he was close to, but even the people that he just sometimes said hi to or something. They were touched by the words that he had for them and how like motivating he was. And yeah, that was really special.
Remember that one of the last weekends, he wanted to take us out to the school, and he took us on a little bit of a walking tour, all of us. And he wasn't as mobile at that point, and he still made it, around. And we were all amazed that it didn't matter who came walking by, they all said hello to Drew, and including like the security guard and the janitors. And there were just people that were so happy to see him on the school property and say hello to him. And I remember that it was a nice sunny day. And we also got to talk to his principal, who that community was just fantastic. The way that they allowed that service to take place in December, and we were grateful that so many people were able to come and spend that day.
Yeah, he was really good at being alone, but he was also his specialty was with people, and that's why we're on this podcast. That's why we're doing all this. One thing like I want to go back to the day of is I was just thinking about the fact that like even on the day of, he spent all that time with us, and he was making sure we're okay, but he took some time for himself, and he spent like half an hour to an hour, obviously contemplating, the day and what was going to happen. And I felt like Drew had a really good balance of that. Um, yeah.
I can remember that day. Just before we were just sitting on the couch, and he said, "I think I'm ready." And he got up, and then we eventually all followed into his room, and he laid down on the bed, and we all laid down, kneeled down beside him, and kind of grabbed a piece of him, and we went around and shared our favorite memory of Drew. And then he took his medicine, and within 2 minutes he was snoring, which was such a peaceful sound to us because the poor kid hadn't slept for months. And then within 2 hours, he passed. And during those 2 hours, we just stayed there and listened to, he had made a playlist for the moment. And we listened to that. And it was really a beautiful process. And I think he would be happy that we were sharing what it looked like.
Yeah, his playlist was awesome. He had Tom Petty, the Beatles, Pink Floyd,
Harry Potter.
Yeah, all of his favorites, and he actually saved that playlist, or I still have that playlist. I think I've shared it with you guys, and every now and then I'll go back and there's a Tom Petty song called "Something Good Coming." It's one of my favorite songs now. I had actually never heard it before that day. And yeah, he picked the perfect songs for us, I feel, and for him. I want to talk like a little bit about like afterwards too. You guys want to talk about how you dealt with it? I guess. I mean, you guys lived through a really heavy experience. The death of your like youngest son, or I guess like only son, and it's weird even saying that out loud. And maybe you guys want to talk about that because I think we all talked about the fact that the reason we're here is hopefully, we can share some stuff that might help other people that might go through something like this.
Well, I know personally for me, it's obviously been up and down struggle. Some days are really good, other days are really difficult. I remember talking to Drew, and Drew, one of Drew's biggest fears was that I was just going to wallow away in grief and possibly even become a hoarder. Neither one has happened. I've made sure to honor Drew's memory by trying to live large, getting out and staying active, recognizing that he would want us to be active and enjoying our lives. Drew had a birthday. His birthday would have been on May 15th. And I think we all did something special to celebrate. One of his sisters planted a tree. We sent pizza to his classroom. I shared a love of Harry Potter with Drew. So I took myself to Universal Studios and did every ride there. And I think he was riding along with me while I was screaming on those roller coasters. So that was a great way to spend his birthday. But it is a constant struggle waking up every day and knowing you're a grieving parent. But you keep going, and I just keep taking comfort in the fact that Drew is no longer in pain. It was so difficult those last 2 months, in spite of all the support, watching him decline. That was really hard. So I'm so thankful that he lived in California and had the option to use medical aid in dying to go out when he felt he was ready, and to do it with such grace.
Yeah, there's no question that we're all grateful that he had that option. And none of us really knew if he was going to avail himself of that option. we were never really sure because he was in so much pain for literally years. There were times we'd visit him and he'd be back in his room and he probably didn't think any of us could hear him, but we could all hear the pain that he was in. And never knowing how that was going to play out, I think it gave him comfort that he had that option available to him if, in fact, he decided he wanted to take advantage of that, which he did. And he kind of brought us all along on that process. But in terms of Haas, when you were asking about the after effect, the two things I remember most, one is when we were packing up to leave because we had been here like 6-8 weeks straight, and it kind of disrupted your life and Z's life, and you guys were hosting us here at the house, and we all felt bad about leaving you alone, because it went from a whirlwind of having literally dozens of people coming through the house to you guys being alone, and I think we were all concerned about that. But I know that Drew pops up in mysterious ways. And I know you guys have talked about that. The one memory that I have that's vivid, we used to talk about hockey all the time and the Blackhawks. And he used to talk about Connor Bedard and how great would that be if the Hawks got him. And of course, through Drew's probably willing it, the Hawks were able to draft Connor Bedard. And I remember hearing that, and I literally reached for my phone like to text him. And that's, that kind of stuff would happen regularly where you wanted to share something with him, but you couldn't.
Yeah. I thought about, because I got to know your family so well, it seems like everybody processes grief differently. And yeah, I want to ask you guys, was it a challenge like processing your own grief while also, you guys still have children that were there that day who you want to help as well and be there for? How did you guys find that balance, if at all? It's hard.
Yeah, that is a difficult struggle. The girls, obviously have grieved in their own way, and we've attempted to be there to support one another. But it's been a whole process for all of us, the grief, and we do text often when we think of Drew. A lot of times on the timeline of Google Photos, he'll come up and we'll share that. And we've just tried to support one another as time continues.
Go on, Steve.
I think what's been really something to see is the way that the girls have, with Shay and Alex, have done a good job of explaining to the 4 grandkids that Drew's no longer here, but how they celebrate, Drew's life with them, whatever chance they can. And, since we've been out here, even the last few days, they've been, FaceTiming with the kids and reminding them that they're at Uncle Drew's. And they've done a pretty darn good job with those kids.
Would you have any, have you learned anything about grief as far as like coping with it? Any advice or thoughts or anything you would want to like elaborate on that might like help someone else that's going through the same thing?
I think one of the things for me, and I do see a therapist to help me cope with it, is just the waves that I'll be feeling absolutely fine, and then something will hit me or trigger me, whether it be a song that was one of Drew's favorites or something, and then it's like you relive the whole experience. And I don't think that will ever go away. I think obviously the pain will lessen, but it will always be there in some form. So just again, trying to live good quality life and compensate and know that we're doing that in spite of the tragedy we've been through.
It's interesting because you said it earlier, it's about people process, grief differently. We all do. I know talking with other people that had met Drew and seen what he was going through and talking to them about that was helpful, because sometimes, you keep a lot of that inside you and you don't share it. And it's good to be able to share with other people who feel the same way about Drew. Um, I think the big thing that we all had in our minds was trying to make sure that we honored, his life about trying to be there for everybody in the family and be supportive and live, the way that he wanted everybody to be together, stay in contact and support one another. And, he did such a good job of demonstrating that, on a day-to-day basis, and always putting everyone else first, before himself.
I think being a special ed teacher, I feel like I didn't think about that like enough about him. But I think like how thoughtful and considerate he was must stem from that, or just maybe how he was raised or something about him. Um, but yeah, when you're going through that much pain and you're still thinking about like others, that's like the height of consideration for others.
Yes, he did. He did attempt to have everything in order for us and left us some detailed notes about his wishes, which really have been helpful in this process.
One thing I learned is that he wrote a lot at the towards the end of his life, or just the last month. I don't know if it was just the last month or two, but in general, he started writing on everything. I found like envelopes. I know he had notebooks. He had a journal. Um, Seems like I always wondered what he did at night, because he had such a hard time sleeping, and poor guy was in pain too. But it seems like he was always doing something, and instead of just like wallowing, he kind of was productive, and even in his worst times. And I'm sure you guys do as well, but I draw so much inspiration from that.
He wrote an awful lot of notes and cards to people. I know my mom always had wanted to come out here to California, but it was hard for her to travel. And there was nothing better in her world than getting a card from Drew.
Yeah, Drew got me into cards too. Now I write a lot more cards than I used to. And yeah, he was really thoughtful with stuff like that.
That's funny you mentioned that because I just made it my goal to send a couple cards every month to people I haven't been in touch with for a while. And I attribute that to Drew as well.
I've been thinking a lot about from your guys' son. I feel like I learned how to live life a lot because I got to see. I think he was always a really cool guy, but his disease and what he drew from it, and like kind of the warrior he became, he was always like he was always a hockey player, but to see him firsthand take that hockey mentality and take it into battling cancer, and just the small things that I got to see him do on a day-to-day basis that I didn't think too much about. I feel like those things we all know, what I'm talking about. It's all the stuff he said on the podcast before, the stuff that people send emails about, but I feel like he lives through us in that way. Yeah.
One thing that really comes to my mind, because I had visited him as well as Steve a number of times throughout the years while he was sick. Um, but it wasn't until I ended up retiring early. I am a special ed teacher and I left a couple years earlier than I intended. And I was out here for those couple months with Drew before the family came out. And it was then that I realized how horrific and how cancer is like a full time job, just juggling all the appointments and everything else. And Drew had done such a good job of keeping all that to himself and managing. I didn't really realize how much it took out of him until I was here for an extended period of time. And it just surprises me how well he was able to cope.
I really feel like it was an act of love for you guys. He mentioned to me that, he didn't, especially you and Katie and Kelly, he didn't want you all to have to see that, and be a part of it. And I think it was such an act of love to spare. And I guess I don't know what the right answer is here, but so I'll be careful with my words. But to maybe spare of you guys, like, of those thoughts and
Right,
times. But I also thought it was beautiful how at the end he let you guys in,
right.
because I know you and Steve like helped him a lot in that last 2 weeks, and that was really cool. I mean, it was a very honorable thing to do because there's nothing like your mom. The time that he spent with you, I mean, it made me change how I treat my own mom. Like honestly, and you were such a focus of his life for the last 2 years, especially after you retired. I know one of the things he said that he wanted to be alive till you retire. Then he kept going longer. And the relationship you guys had, just the way you guys hung out, yeah, all day, it was just like best friends. It wasn't really just like mom and daughter, sorry, mom and son. But that was really cool. I don't think I've personally ever seen anything like that. I don't really know of many mother son relationships like that, and yeah, it made me like jealous, and I got closer to my mom after that.
Oh,
I learned
that's
so much from
nice.
that.
Yeah, Drew was one of my best buddies, and I'll always really treasure that time that we had together. He made me laugh up until the very end.
He was, what was really interesting about his journey through this whole process early on when he was first diagnosed. Susie and I were like pretty well involved with him and the doctors and the options and the treatments and the surgeries. But, you know, probably three years into it, something like that, he began to take a lot more control over his own care, and he probably knew where things were headed. And that's when he did a lot of the planning for the medical aid in dying with Dr. Miller. And I think one of the most memorable parts of that whole process is when you and I came in to go visit with Dr. Miller after Drew had been, talking with him and planning for that for quite some time. And I think we had like a 15-minute appointment and ended up staying there for well over an hour. And when we were walking out of there, I remember thinking about how difficult it had been for him to get to that point and how he had tried to protect the family and let everyone know that he had this in hand. And he carried on with that approach, right up until the last couple of weeks when he did finally let us in. And, I know I got a much deeper understanding of the caregiving that you and Z had been providing to him for years, and how selfless that was, because he really needed a lot of, help at that point. And we were always grateful that he had that. We could go home knowing that he was in good hands with you guys.
That's very nice of you to say. I told him the same thing as what I got from him. Just be having the honor, and we had a different relationship because we were still like roommates. Roommates have their own relationship, as I've told you. But when we would go into that room, we both were in the zone, and we knew what we were doing, and we had some of our deepest talks. It was a really obviously we were in a situation that neither of us would like to be in. Obviously I didn't want him to be in it. A poor guy had to just go through pain, but he would, even in that moment, when I say all these nice things about him, is because I know. I mean, I'm just the one doing the thing. He's the one that has to go through it. But even in those moments, he would actually he would try to like hype me up or talk me through it. And like, the dude is going through pain, and he's like trying to hype me up, telling me all these nice things, in moments where he could be, I just know what he was going through. And yeah, those moments I draw so much inspiration from. And I just learned so much from him. I think he was supposed to be a part of my life. And I'm so just grateful that I met him and it changed the course of my life in such a positive way. Um, you know, he gave me confidence that, you could have friendships that are that strong and real. And yeah, that for me, that was like everything, I guess.
It's so ironic that we're sitting here now with the lady in the red dress.
Gloria.
I'm staring at her. We're in the living room of Haas and Z and Drew's house. And that was the first thing that I saw when Drew first moved out to California in the log cabin. You'd walk in the house and there was Gloria on the wall. And here she is,
I feel like Drew made life a lot of fun. Like the word fun was used a lot, but he always found ways to make life fun, whether it's just chilling. I always felt like comfortable when there was a lot of people and he was around. He was kind of life of the party and he was very aware of everything. Him and Z both share that in common. So when they threw a party, they were both just in the zone. But like we talk a lot about his strength and stuff, but man, he was just a fun dude. That's why there's so many people, there's so many different types of people that like gravitate towards him. He was just fun.
That reminds me of one of, I think, Drew's special talents was the ability to connect different people with one another. And Drew would always go over to his friend Mr. B's house on a Friday afternoon. And a few months ago, Hasban, I think you called me or texted me from there that you were over at Mr. B's for a Friday night session. And I was just so proud. And I thought that is just so awesome that Drew made friends and that you're keeping those connections. And he would be so happy with that.
I thought about that a lot, actually, that, everyone has their own relationship with Drew. And I always, felt, at point, I just felt like a roommate. That's all. But even with me, I feel like he left so much behind. Not just friends, relationships. There's so many small things. Even his lawyer recorded something for Compassion and Choices, and she shouted me out, and I just couldn't believe it. I was just like, it just like, yeah, he just left so much. He thought so much about all of us, and that Friday night group or some like other friends and people that like reached out to me, even this podcast. What a man to like, leave stuff for us behind. He knew he was gonna pass, but he thought about our lives afterwards. And I just think about that probably like most often.
Right.
I wanted to talk about like him actually taking the a medication like a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So he takes the medication and he falls asleep for the first time we've ever seen him. For me, because I lived with him through most of his cancer journey, I don't think I really ever saw him sleep. He closed his eyes, but he was kind of always, it seemed like he was always up. That scared the hell out of me too. And I was like, I don't know how you're doing this for this many years. But he did it, and and that was the first time I heard him snore. That was kind of cool.
Yeah.
And even his last words were pretty funny, like as I remember. He told us all like a memory, and I think he said something to Kelly or somebody, and he said, "I'm happy," I think.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think his final words might have been something like that. Yeah,
Right.
like I'm happy.
I'm happy.
Yeah, and that was really cool to hear.
And he took the medication with some raspberry sorbet.
Yeah, sure.
And he didn't want to give up the spoon. He kept licking that spoon, get all that sorbet on there.
Yeah, and we also had those two like nurses with us. I know one of them was named Freya. Forget the name of the other, but the people at the hospice company or like organization were really like amazing too, and I wanted to give them like a shout out. So I think you guys started I think you started hospice a week before he took like the medication, right?
Hmm.
So he was on hospice for a week just so he
Right.
can get stronger like medication because his condition was deteriorating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was always in control of his own treatment and his meds. He was pretty good with all of that. And he kind of resisted using hospice.
Mm-hmm.
But he also wanted to make sure that hospice was available in case, something didn't go to plan. So there'd be some, medical professionals here to help support the family. And they were great. But he really directed everything right up to the day that he took the prescription.
And he had the medical professionals mix up the prescription. He didn't want Steve or I to have that on us, even though we both volunteered. And so that was really something that comforted him to know that we weren't going to have to be the ones to mix that up and administer it. And like you said, Haas, the people from hospice were just amazing. And I still get phone calls from grief counselors needing to know if I need some help or anything. So they're still reaching out.
Yeah, those people are really amazing. I have very little experience with death before this, except maybe my grandma. Um, and I have to say, those people are like angels. I mean, there's like a
Yes.
glow to them, the way they talk to the patients, and yeah, I couldn't say nicer things like about them. And yeah, I'm really happy that they were there for like Andrew and he like did that. And one thing I guess I want to point out to everybody is, like the medical aid dying process. I listen to podcasts myself and I'm like thinking, what point is Andrew going to pull the trigger? Because I think Steve, we talked about this too. When he talked about it with us, nobody tried to influence him in like any way. He would just kind of tell us what he's going to do. Even though we're all here, we never asked him questions about what day is it going to be or how our schedule is affected. That was really cool of your family too. You guys were just here. There was no end date to it or it's not like, because obviously everybody has a life and stuff like that, but you guys were just here and that was really cool. I know your daughters have kids and families and it seems like everybody came together and they were like able to spend time here. Um, but I guess I want to point out to people that it's not like Andrew. I don't think Andrew took the medication early, if that makes sense. Like I don't know how to talk about this. He was he gave it his all. Like he lived life to almost to the end, to the point where obviously at one point your quality of life is just not there. And I really think as like I was really impressed with how far he pushed his own body and his will. Um, I I tell the story to a lot of people that, he passed in November and like that July, he was already feeling real bad. And even then, he flew to his friend's wedding in like Chicago. And I know how much pain he was in and how tough that flight was for him, but he still did it. And then even when he got there during the ceremony, he was in the sun. It was like 90 degrees or something and he was in the sun and in his condition he still just willed himself through it and that's just one of those like warrior tidbits about him and there was a lot of them but I guess I just wanted people to know that not that it matters. I mean I think you could take the prescription at any time you feel comfortable but he really willed himself to as much life as he could.
I agree, Haas. I feel like that wedding, I believe it was September 10th. I'm not sure of the exact date, but I had anticipated and I said to someone, I feel like Drew is holding out for this wedding and then things are going to really take a dive for the worst. And I do think he did will himself to be there because I was with him at the wedding and yeah, he was just racked with pain and yet nobody knew. He just kept it to himself, and it was amazing that he could withstand all the activities of that weekend.
It's also, I think, important for people to understand that having the option that he did made his life a little bit easier. He would say to us, you know, as a family and individually, that he wasn't sure that he would ever use that prescription, and that he really preferred to just pass in his sleep. That's what he had hoped. But of course, as we were just talking about, he didn't really sleep much. And that was a hard thing. And he pushed on for a lot longer than, we all thought was possible, because he had so much pain. And even though he got great treatment and had good meds, it still was a constant battle, each and every hour for him. And he, had the option available. And unfortunately, not everybody does. And I think that's one thing we wanted to touch on in this podcast today is, making sure that people have the option. And, I think we all have really grown to respect the work that Compassion and Choices does as an organization. It's important for people in that situation to have that option available to them, so that it brings them a little bit of comfort and hopefully makes their journey, a little bit more manageable. I'm not sure those are the right words, but he took some comfort in knowing that he had that option.
Yeah, with medical aid in dying, and obviously it's probably a charged subject because there's religious people that don't want it like available. But after seeing the process, because even talking about this topic, it's a little strange. I'll be real. But after, I think Drew gave me the urge as well. After seeing him being able to talk about it and seeing how it affected, just having it affected, I think it reduces the anxiety of everything. Just knowing you have a choice and an option, I think that helped him live a more dignified life and gave him options. I think everyone deserves that option. It's really hard for me to sit here and say that someone shouldn't have it because I think they shouldn't or something like that. That just seems really wrong.
Well, we do stay, we want the listeners to know that we have stayed active with Compassion and Choices, and hoping, I live in Illinois and I've been doing some work, and we're hoping to move the movement along, get more people involved and recognize the benefits, and, know the guidelines of medical aid in dying.
And it's I hope I'm getting this information right, but Oregon and like Virginia now have removed their like residency laws, which means that anybody who's in that state can avail the option, which I think is actually pretty amazing. That these states have done that. I know the Supreme Court might go like after this law, so on a federal level, it's still up for grabs, I guess. But it's just the fact, we've talked to Dan Diaz, Brittany like Maynard's like husband, and just the fact that it's just sad, like people in their worst moments, in their most vulnerable, still have to figure out how to get to a different state just to relieve their suffering. I mean,
Right.
to move all your stuff and actually take it to a different state, that is not something that I hope people have to go through, but I know they do. I guess to close it out, I had a couple questions for you guys, but one of them that I had written down was, what does it mean for you to move on from your experience? I know it's still pretty early. It's 9 months. You're only 9 months. No, 8 months in or 9 months in. 9 months in. Today is actually the ninth month. I think
Today's the 8th month.
8th month. Okay, we're a little.
Ahead of
I guess.
ourselves.
All right. We're in the same ballpark, but yeah, it's still pretty early. And I guess, what does it mean for you guys to move on, or what does it mean to find a way through this?
Well, I think for me, again, it's just trying to move on with a positive mindset. Um, when I do start feeling, a lot of grief, I just reflect on Andrew's attitude and, hoping to continue to move on in that way, in a positive way, and treat people more like he did, and to continue working with compassion and choices. So hopefully this is available to more people in different states. In terms of moving on, I'll never obviously forget Andrew. I feel like he'll always be a part of me and guide me through my journey. This continues and finding a new normal.
Yeah, I think that's what he wants for you guys. Steve, did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think when you think about moving on, I'm not sure that I'm fully processed everything at this point. I know that I wake up in the morning and usually the first thing I think about, I try to think of something positive about Drew's life. And then I've got this little saying to myself, particularly if I encounter something that's a little more challenging, and it's just, what would Drew do? And I think that sometimes, like, if something isn't going quite right, but we all process it differently. I still don't feel like I fully accepted that he's not here, because I feel like he's here. Or when the family gets together, I think we all just feel him with us. But I don't know if I've moved on to accepting that he's not here yet.
One thing I do have, we know Drew used to enjoy smoking weed. So I have an alarm set every afternoon at 4:20 that goes off. And regardless of what I'm doing, I just look up at the sky and give a big shout out to him.
That's great. I know he'd be really happy about that one. Yeah, he would often remind us when it was 4:20, and even with like weed and marijuana, I feel like it was just a way to bring us together, to like, yeah, to have those conversations. Yeah, and do you guys have? I don't know if you guys have any notes on this, but Drew had some final messages that he said to us, and just some thoughts that he left us with. I know he talked about being kind a lot, and I know it's so cliche and stuff, but I think it's actually a really deep thought as well. The way that he was saying it, and when it comes from somebody who's actually going through the shit, it's way different than me saying it, But he channeled it in some of his toughest moments, and I don't know if you guys have any, memories of things he said, or his life philosophies.
I think he used to stress, and especially as his cancer progressed, for me to just be in the moment and really focus on the moment. And I'm trying to do that more frequently and be present and really mindful of what is going on at the moment.
Yeah, I think the other lesson is he was always trying to bring everybody together, including everybody in our family. And, he constantly was trying to keep the lines of communication open with everybody and trying to lead a positive example. And he also, was, there were no conversations that were off limits with Drew. If he saw something and he thought like he could be helpful, or he thought that somebody needed, to hear some words that might not be something they wanted to hear, I think that last year he made a point of making sure that people understood where he was coming from, and that included everybody in our family.
Yeah, he said some really cool things. Do you remember when I broke the Wii on the last week?
Yes.
We used to love playing like Mario Kart, and I think it was like his last week of life. It could have been the last couple weeks, but I broke his Wii. I broke the screen. Felt terrible. Obviously, he was already not feeling well, and I broke the Wii. And I'm like, oh man, this guy's gonna be mad at me. And I went and bought a new Wii and everything, but I think there was like maybe an hour or two that he was mad, and then he We talked about it. We were good. We were playing Madden again, and he sent me like the store location of where I could get it fixed, and he was over it. It was really cool because I was worried that he would be real mad at me, and I remember just being like, "Oh man!" In that moment, it just felt so terrible to break his Wii because he like loved that thing, and got it fixed. But it was really cool. He just got over it. I'm sure. I remember you guys telling me too that you were worried that that he'd be angry at me or something like that, but we were just fine right after.
Yeah, he never was. Even as a kid, he'd get mad and then it'd be all over.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because even with me, there's times he was mad at me, but he never held it. He
Hmm.
never held being mad at me. I will give him so much credit for that, and I know that I'm sure I have my things that I did that like annoyed him, but he never held it. I have to give him a lot of credit for that. Actually, now that you mention it, he just would let it go. Um, that's funny. I guess we're getting to the end of the pod, and I know you guys have some things written down. Is there anything else that you guys want to say?
Well, one thing I wanted to, two things actually. Um, Drew seems to, always be the elephant in the room. And as a grieving parent, I'm just sharing what helps me. Um, Often when I'm in a crowd, people seem afraid to mention Drew. And to be honest, it's just the opposite. I enjoy talking about him, and it gives me great pride and comfort to speak about him. So I would encourage, friends of people who have a similar situation to allow a grieving person to talk and not to feel as if, oh, should I mention it, will I make them upset? It's a comfort to talk about your loved one. The other thing, I wanted to give a big thank you for all the people who have listened to the podcast and then taken the time to write something. And I know Hasban has been amazing about sharing those texts with us. And inevitably, it seems as though I'm having a really rough day and thinking, oh, how could this happen? And then suddenly one of those podcast texts will come through talking about how someone has listened and what a comfort and amazing guy Drew was. And that just brings me it full circle, and it makes me feel so good. So thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a very good um, remembrance. Is when you send around those notes that people write into about the podcast, that those are so meaningful now. When Drew first broached the subject that he was going to do this podcast, and I mean, I don't know how long ago that is, Has, but is that like
I
a
think
year and a half ago?
about 2 years ago now, we were walking to the beach and he already had the blog going, and I'm like, man, you should talk about this. And he did. He talked about it. We got the podcast equipment. It seemed like a big deal at first, big ordeal. We messed up a lot in the beginning, but we kept going. And yeah.
He touched a lot of people. When we started reading his blogs originally, we were like, holy cow, did you know that Drew could write that well?
Yeah.
He was just a great writer. And then you guys got the podcast going, and we weren't sure, like, well, what's it going to be about? And then, you guys had that period where you were trying to come up like with a name for it. And then when we heard it was Death with Dignity, we were like, wow, you're really tackling a pretty heavy subject. And we all remember like Drew saying, yeah, I'm going to do 2 or 3 or 4 of these things. And then, it's turned out, I don't know how many, there's like, what?
21.
21. Okay.
Yeah.
Just hard to believe. And there's a lot of just great information in there. I think the thing that when you ask about how, like, what's helpful moving forward, the best part about the memories of Drew, and they happen at both services. Like, we had a pretty informal services, but the best part was when we asked everybody if they had a story they wanted to share about Drew, and they would come up and share that story. And that was the best part of those services. And, even today, when we all get together, we all share, stories about Drew, and talking about him in that way is what, makes it just a little bit easier each day.
Yeah, I think about grief a lot, and I'll be real. You talking about Drew being that like elephant in the room. Um, everyone's going through it differently. I've noticed even with your family, with different family members, some people like talking about him more. Some people just don't like to talk about it like as much.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you talked about your papa too when he lost his wife, and how he just got rid of everything of hers.
Right.
And it seems like yeah, everyone has their own way of going through it. We grieve differently, but I personally love to hear stories about him and just the stuff that he did. I think that's one of the, yeah, I don't know. It's just a way to like remember him. And regarding the podcast, Steve, the one thing that I wish I could just go back is my favorite episodes are really just when he talked. And it was cool that he interviewed all the guests, and that's what it became like about other people's stories. But if I could go back, I would just sit with him and we would smoke a J or two and just record like 3 or 4 more episodes about just stuff we wanted to talk about. And yeah, that's probably like just something I think about like a lot. But we still did 21 episodes. And you're right, like what a heavy subject to talk about. People do get really uncomfortable. And he sat with his mom, and credit to both of you. And that episode, like it's something that I was in that room with you guys, but I felt like there was a space that was created between you two, and I'll just never really forget that moment. And it was so heavy, and that dude could just go so deep and do it with such grace. And he had a way with words where if I tried to talk that deep, I feel like I would say the wrong thing or use the wrong words. But he was just so precise with his speech and language. And that podcast that you two have done, I mean, that was just like amazing.
Yeah, that was an honor. Something I'll always remember.
Yeah, that room, that was a special hour or hour and a half, whatever it was. um yeah. But unless you guys got anything else to say, I know it's already a heavy episode, heavy topic. Very courageous of you guys to sit down here and do this. I wanted to ask you too, but I wasn't sure either. I was like, do I ask? And when you asked me to like do this, I was so happy. I've been wanting to get into the podcast, and people have been telling me I should do it more. And there's more stories to hear and tell, and I want to continue this too in some way. And continue this
Yes,
awesome thing that he left for us and for the world. Um, yeah. Do you
that
guys have any
sounds like a
final thoughts?
good plan.
Yeah, I'll try to make it happen.
I just want to say again, thank you for listening. We hope that some part of this touches you, or you can pass it along to someone else who's in a situation. And again, thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, a lot of people reached out. Anyone that has, just want to thank you guys because those messages, they make my day. That's for sure. Um,
And we hope that you're able to continue to do a podcast every now and then, has when you can, because it seems like it really helps an awful lot of people, and you guys did a great job with it. So surely encourage you guys moving forward.
For sure. I'll try to do the best I can. It was really nice when Andrew did all the talking and I could just ask a couple questions. I felt really comfortable in that role. But I feel like I got to hear him speak and become a better speaker myself. He was, like I always say, like his hidden talent was, I think it's a special ed teacher thing, just explaining stuff and talking real slow and being precise with your language, and always kind of having like, a cool way of speaking. I don't think I can get to that level, but I'll do my best to carry this thing on and forward. All right, everybody. I think we're gonna end this episode. We thank you for listening, and Steve and Suzy, you guys are like warriors for joining us and kind of carrying Drew's legacy forward by being just as strong as he was. And I've told you guys this in person, but you guys raised such an awesome man, and you should be so proud of that. And like he touched so many lives, and whatever you guys were doing, you were doing it right, because the thing I always say about him from the outside is I've met a lot of different types of people, and people are just shaped by their environment so much, and they're like a product of where they're from, whether it's Naperville or Chicago or whatever it is. But he kind of stood on his own. He was just like a person that went beyond those like labels and boxes, and yeah. So here's to Drew.
Love you, Drew.
Love you, Drew.
Take care, everybody.